Come explore the depths of consciousness, where we raise the vibes and open minds.
Welcome to Grounded Galactic Twins podcast. I'm Emily.
And I'm Allison.
Today, we are going to dive into the topic of disclosure. 2026 is the year of disclosure leading up to next year's open contact events. And so there's been a lot happening lately in the news with different politicians, and there's some momentum building and some shift in consciousness happening right now. And we definitely wanted to cover everything that's going on and have a discussion about it.
Yeah, I'm very excited because I've noticed a lot of, just a lot more news coverage about this type of thing. And it seems to me that the news coverage, you can kind of tell when people are skeptical or maybe not taking it seriously. It's not like hard hitting reporting, but when you see TMZ interviewers who seem to be taking UFO disclosure comments by congressmen seriously and interviewing those people, it raises my eyebrow and go, oh, this is starting to really seep into the mainstream, and I think is really encouraging people to start actually taking it seriously. But before we dive deep into 2026 and 2027, we wanted to have a little moment and talk about Nick Pope, because he was a man who was very vocal in this space when it came to disclosure. And unfortunately, he passed away. I think it was about a week ago now from the time that we are filming this. He passed of cancer. And I just wanted to, if people don't know who he is, I just wanted to talk about some of his contributions to the field. And you probably have seen him on Ancient Aliens if you've never otherwise heard of him. We'll pop up a picture so you can get an idea of what he looked like. People coined him as the real life Mulder. His career in this space started out in the mid 80s. He worked for the UK Ministry of Defense for several years, from 1985 to 2006. And during that time, there was a spell in there where he was basically assigned to their UFO desk, where he investigated hundreds of UAP and UFO sightings and reports that were submitted. His main goal was looking at it from like a national security standpoint. Even when he was no longer with the government, he wrote countless articles, went on countless TV shows, and was in documentaries and on podcasts. He would travel all over the world and go to UFO conferences, which I have met him at 2 UFO conferences, one in Arkansas and one in Nevada. And he was just known to be this really nice, down-to-earth person who was totally approachable, would tell you anything that you wanted to know, he'd answer any question, was always so respectful. And he had a way of really sort of dumbing it down for the common person as far as what he knew about the government and their involvement and UAPs. And he had a way of, I guess, making the topic approachable and interesting to the common man. And I think that is one of his biggest contributions. We were very sad to hear of the news of his passing. And so
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace, Nick Pope. 2026, Year of Disclosure, and not just UFO and ET disclosure. That's specifically what we are going to be referring to, is the disclosure to the American people. I kind of want to just keep it in that sort of arena. We're just focusing on what we've noticed as the momentum, like Emily said, for disclosure seeming to be imminent. And then that is leading into 2027, which has been coined as the year of open contact, global open contact, where there will be, without a shadow of a doubt, everyone will know that we're not alone. Whatever that means. There are non-human intelligent entities, whether that means they're going to start showing up in the skies or walking along the street materializing out of thin air. We don't really know. There have been predictions and things that people have said might happen as we approach that time. But you need to see the present wrapped under the tree. So that's disclosure. And then opening the gift is like open contact. You have to know something's coming. Maybe there's a surprise coming. Something's coming to maybe lessen the shock a little bit. I think one of the reasons why we haven't already had disclosure and a lot of the stuff has been covered up is because they think we can't handle it. I think we're past that now. The American people all over the world are more ready and willing to maybe accept that we aren't alone. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I mean, there are some polls recently that show that I wouldn't say the vast majority, but the majority of people think that, quote unquote, we're not alone in the universe. Your metaphor about the Christmas present, that's disclosure. Opening the present is open contact. And this idea that our government is slowly releasing information, or at least not rebutting information that Congressman Tim Burchett has recently come out and talked about. Doesn't seem like there's really been much of a backlash against him from our government, at least nothing that's been public facing. So we've got different entities in government, non-government, some that you might consider more woo-woo. We've got big Hollywood directors like Steven Spielberg coming out with his Disclosure Day movie this summer. So we've got this not just continued conversation, but this amplification of this conversation about disclosure. As someone who is a self-described semi-skeptic when it comes to the topic of extraterrestrials, this is really interesting to me to see open public conversations about this topic from people who have legitimate authority. So we're going to walk you through some of these conversations that have been happening and ourselves add to that conversation.
Yes, let's look at the most recent timeline because we've talked about before on the podcast congressional hearings. We've talked about the UAP Transparency Act that came out in 2024. So those are some of the more, in prior recent years, movements and things that have happened from a U.S. government standpoint towards disclosure. We're just talking about what has happened in like the last 2 months, because to me, it really seems like it has ramped up. And I want to put this disclaimer right out here in the beginning. A lot of people have said this is just an Epstein distraction. Now, I will admit the timing seems real coincidental. Okay. It does not mean that it's somehow not legitimate just because it is happening at the same time as all of the terrible Epstein crap and we're not getting all of those files. So that's a level of disclosure that we still are, hoping to get ASAP. I've seen so many threads and stuff online of people reacting to this, what we're getting ready to tell you as far as what has been said recently by government officials, and they're just saying, oh, this is just another distraction from Epstein. And I disagree with that. It's definitely made it more convenient for them to kind of stall out a little bit. I don't want people to think that that makes this not real.
Certainly, I agree. Both things could be true at the same time, right? Could be used as a distraction, but also just another step in actual disclosure if that's what the government is planning to do. And really what we're seeing here is just a continuation of soft disclosure and trying to normalize the conversation. We can't say yay or nay in terms of Tim Burchett's comments, which we'll talk about in a minute. If that was some sort of planned thing and he was told to say this as part of some type of soft disclosure or normalizing some conversations for, whatever reason the government can use to manipulate the conversation. Or if Tim Burchett is acting independently off of information and he decided himself he wanted to share, we'll maybe cover some of that in the conversation.
So let's jump into this timeline that we're talking about. In February 2026, you've probably seen it, President Obama was doing an interview where they asked him, are aliens real? And he said, oh, they're real. And then he went on to say, but I've never seen them and they're certainly not in Area 51. Now, there were a few other comments made, and then the very next day even, he made another comment into the public to sort of clarify something that he said. I found it really, really interesting that that question was even brought up. And the reason why I am saying this is because, and this is a point that actually Stephen Bassett has talked about recently. I listened to a talk that he gave at the Eureka Springs UFO conference over this past weekend, and it was all about disclosure 2026 and all of that. And he walked through his own timeline, and he went way far back than we're going. He brought up a really good point that I hadn't thought of yet, which is when you have a president or a former president go and do any type of interview, someone, their press person or whoever, is giving that interviewer a list of questions. It is not like you get to ask them whatever you want. Okay. So there's maybe a little bit of soft disclosure there that was intentional. I don't think this question was at all just some off the cuff question.
So you can say with 100% certainty that it was on that list of questions and he was prepared for that, or you're conjecturing that based on what?
I'm repeating what Stephen Bassett had talked about. And he didn't say he saw a list of questions. That's not what I'm saying. It's just common knowledge that when you have someone like that, of that caliber, go on to anything that's going to be in the media, especially if it's live, which I don't remember if that particular one was live or not. I don't think it was. But the people that are doing the interviews are given a list of questions, things to keep away from, things that are okay to ask. And if it's not on the list, you don't ask it. Again, I don't think that was just a random off the cuff question. I think it was on the list of like approved things that you could ask. I don't know. Just think that's interesting. There are a lot of implications there, I guess. Is what I was.
Sure. If it was purposely included on the list, yeah, I would think it's like they must have anticipated what President Obama was going to say. And in that case, they must then not have thought through what the potential consequences could be. Because if they knew he was going to say, oh, yeah, aliens are real, and then he added some caveats, they must have had known that that was going to spark a huge reaction in the media. In some ways, President Obama has attempted to backtrack the conversation a little bit. That makes me wonder, was that question actually intended, planned, and part of self-disclosure, or was it something that did come out of the blue? I mean, I don't know. We may never know that, but your point is interesting. If that was on this list of approved questions, maybe President Obama said something they weren't expecting.
Well, and I think too, and this is another point that Stephen Bassett mentioned in his recent talk, which is they all knew that this was going to cause someone to ask Trump about it and to get his response. So maybe they didn't know what that response would be, but that's sort of the next item in our timeline, which is within a day or two, he was interviewed. I want to say he was on Air Force One at the time, and someone asked him about President Obama's comments. And he came back with saying, well, he gave classified information. Big mistake. He made a big mistake. So there's a lot that he said just in those few words there. And then the very next day, he directed the Department of Defense to identify and release any UAP, UFO related files that they have.
That seems contradictory, right? When you think about it, he's like, President Obama is saying things basically he doesn't need to talk about, bad Obama, bad. And then the very next day, you know what? We're also going to put a bunch of information out, essentially confirming or corroborating what President Obama said. So,
well, I think that his whole point of his immediate reaction wasn't Obama's off his rocker and insulting him like you would think he would normally do. He said, oh, he shouldn't have said that because it's classified information. So in a way, in my mind, that's Trump admitting that the information exists and it's classified, and that the president is not, and former president is not supposed to talk about it. So it's like there's this admission already in his answer that I don't think he realized at the time that he was giving.
No, he doesn't think before he speaks, but it is strange though that he would essentially try to say, no, Obama doesn't need to be talking about that. And then again, the next day he's like, let's talk about this topic more by creating Aliens.Gov. And of course the website has not yet gone live.
Right. So, yeah, good point. So then in March, the US government registered Aliens.gov and Alien.gov. Now, a lot of people have said, well, this is going to be where they're going to do a file dump based on President Trump's directive to release files. Some people have also said that it is a part of the requirements that they're fulfilling, that when the UAP Transparency Act hopefully finally passes, that within that act, there's supposed to be this central hub, and that this is the placeholder for that.
Mhm.
And yes, the registrar's office, or whatever you want to call it, did verify and has verified that the government did register that. It's not just some rando person. It was an actual government,
Mhm.
Registered 2 websites there. But what's funny is that the White House has been super vague, and I don't want to say dismissive, but they really move on from it quickly, because a couple people ask, obviously, what is the purpose of registering this domain? I mean, aliens.gov. Like, I never, it just, even saying it out loud to me is just, that in itself is sort of and it just, that alone, without Trump's comments, without Obama's comments, without congressional hearings, to me, this is almost like one of the biggest things that has happened is them registering aliens.gov. Everyone knows that .gov websites are serious, they're official. And so it cracks me up that word and .gov are together. The White House really has only said, stay tuned. They really haven't said anything else. I probably need to bookmark it and just start checking it every morning. Is there anything there now? What is the purpose of this? Because already, what's the name of it? They actually already have some UFO and UAP documents in the public record on a government site. I'm trying to remember the name of the website.
You're saying in addition to the public hearing documents from the congressional hearings.
Right.
While you're looking for that, I think what's most interesting to me is, and potentially most frightening and concerning to me, is that, of course, our US government seems to be doing the best that it can to control the narrative around this topic. And there's a lot of distrust in the government generally, regardless of who may be in office. But especially now, there's a lot of strife, and we're in the middle of this conflict with Iran, and we still don't have disclosure on Epstein. And so now we're throwing this whole big topic of extraterrestrials on top of the mix. So I don't quite know what to make of it. And for me personally, it's really hard to trust anything that is being filtered through the White House. I just hope that if and when a website like aliens.gov goes live, that whatever information on there is information that's unredacted, publicly available to everybody around the world, and it's not filtered. But there's really not much trust from me personally that it's going to be complete, accurate, and not have some underlying agenda. We shall see, I guess.
So I found the name of it. I found my link. It's archives.gov. So there's a website. So this is the National Archives. There's a whole lot of stuff there, but there's a specific place. It's archives.gov/research/topics/UAPs. And then when you get to that page, you've got FAA records, Office of Secretary of Defense, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, National Security Agency, Department of State, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And in each of those categories, you can drill down and see reports and photos and all types of things already in the National Archive. I don't know that a lot of people know this stuff is here. They do data dumps. They'll do 6-month worth of dumps at a time. The last time it was in my radar was last April. They had just done a dump that covered October 2024 to February 2025. And I haven't honestly looked at it since then. And I'll put the links in our description of the episode here so you can get to it yourself. So that does already exist.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder how Alien and aliens.gov is going to differ.
Maybe just make that information more readily available so people aren't having to dig through the archives.
Yeah. Yeah. And that it's a user-friendly,
Right.
website, as some government websites are not. All right, so that was February. That was March. So later in the month of March, former Congressman Matt Gaetz went on the air and he talked about how he was briefed by a uniformed army, I think a general is what he said, who is basically a whistleblower who was involved in a secret space program and was aware of and knew about captured aliens or captured extraterrestrials, as well as captured humans who were involved in a human breeding program in order to produce a hybridized human ET being for the purpose of intergalactic communication. So that in a nutshell is what he talked about. Now, Matt Gaetz, from what I understand, I wasn't super familiar with him before all of this, but from what I've read about him, he's had some kind of, I don't want to say like scandals, but he's not been known to be this well-respected, you know what I mean? But he was a former congressman. He did add that this program was happening in 6 to 12 locations across the U.S. He didn't indicate how long. That's the gist of pretty much what he said. So this was a big deal. And what happened a little bit after that, so this was early April now, Tim Burchett, congressman out of Tennessee, Republican congressman, who we've talked about him, I think, a few times before because he's a major player in the UAP Transparency Act. And he's the one who has been super vocal and gone on lots of interviews and puts out things online talking about disclosure. Like he knows they exist. He thinks American people deserve the truth and we deserve this information. And he is just begging for disclosure to happen, basically. And he has gotten threats, and he's talked about that before, that he's been threatened, like, hey, you need to, you're upsetting the apple cart kind of thing. And do you really want to do this? This is not wise type of thing. So he was asked on News Nation specifically about Matt Gaetz' comments. And yeah, I mean, you could see the intensity. You could hear it in his voice. You can sense that, at least I can sense that he's being sincere. He's being serious. This is concerning to him. But basically, he said that he's been in briefings that would keep you up at night. If we knew what he knew, it would set the earth on fire. Those are some of the things that he said in that interview. There were other things that were talked about in the interview that we'll kind of talk about a little bit later. The interview actually started with him being asked about some of the recent deaths and disappearances that have happened. So that's kind of how it started out. But then it went into, let's talk about Matt Gaetz' comments. And then that's when he said, yep, there have been. And he confirmed something that Matt had said. It was either in this interview or the one he did with TMZ, which was just a few days later. We'll put the link and everything to that as well. But they asked him about it too. And again, it felt like kind of hard-hitting reporting for them. They seemed concerned about it and they seemed to take it seriously. And you're thinking like, oh, this is TMZ? That doesn't, seem like something that they would cover at all. But when you have TMZ talking to a congressman about something like that, it's crazy. It's interesting.
I'm curious. Let's go back just a little bit to Matt Gaetz, because he's talking about how he's been informed by this person in uniform about this hybridization program. And you've talked at length in previous episodes about hybridization. How does his general view, or the few details that he did publicly put out, jive with what you know and have read about hybridization?
Yeah, so he specifically said forced like captive ETs and humans. And I want to say he also added, you have to correct my wording if I get this wrong, but that the humans involved were basically taken from maybe like a war-torn area or someplace where nobody would even know they were gone or why they were gone. And those are the type of subjects that they have in their hybridization program. Now, is he admitting that the United States government is kidnapping people in that statement? Sure sounds like it. Yeah, sure sounds like it. Now, if you've listened to the last podcast episode that was right before this one, you can go back and listen to it. It was just me talking about what seemed like to me a partnership abduction scenario with what appeared to be aliens and humans working together. But aside from that, I think that there are a lot of people who have had experiences or are in the government that have made comments over the years or know about these secret space programs that have said enough in the public arena or even in a skiff that we don't know about. But David Grush has said something to this effect as well, that these programs exist, but that I am kind of the opinion that there are many different hybridization programs. One of the most popular ones that, if you want to call it a conspiracy or not, doesn't really matter, but that has been going around for a while, is that after the Roswell crash, like that was a major event. And at the time, Truman was president. And there's this belief that there was an agreement between the ETs, so the Greys at that time, and the US government. And there was this trade they negotiated, right? And they were like, hey, wow, you came from outer space. Look at this ship and the material that it's made from. Like, this is wild to us. Oh, look at your energy systems, whatever. Hey, we would love some of that technology. And the ETs were like, okay, yeah, we will do that. But can we have some humans to experiment on and abduct and take and do things with? So I think that there's been a hybridization program since then that the government has known about, that I think perhaps they realized at some point, maybe, okay, they're making hybrids. What's the purpose of them making these hybrids? Maybe they felt like they kind of got the raw end of the deal, or maybe they got into something that they didn't realize, or their fear is coming out and they're going, we better have something too, in case we have to go to war against these hybrids that's run by the aliens and not hybrid program that's run by us. So I think there are multiple hybrid programs that involve the US government and don't involve the US government.
Let me ask you this then. So you're suggesting that after Roswell, now we have this agreement in place, and that now has led to this sort of human-led hybridization program. My question when you're talking is, okay, so does that imply that pre-Roswell there was an alien-led hybridization program? And if so, that would also imply that they're sort of already having their way with capturing their own humans to do their own hybridization with. So why would they need the US government? So is there something else that these otherworldly entities could benefit from through having such a relationship? You essentially said that this hybridization program began after Roswell as a result of this agreement that was made. Okay, well,
That's what I've heard people have said, yes.
okay. So I'm trying to understand then, before that, do you believe or have you read that there was hybridization going on before that? And then the assumption would be that the government didn't know about it, they weren't involved in it.
I think that's just a much bigger question that doesn't necessarily fit into the disclosure discussion, because from my point of view, every human is hybridized to some extent, and we have been hybridized for thousands of years. Active hybridization programs, I believe, have been more recent, yes. So post 1947, I think anything pre 1947, I don't think there was an active hybridization program for a long time, because from what I understand and what I've read and what I've heard is basically the Anunnaki effed that up for for everybody else, because they were doing experiments with DNA and genetic experiments between various beings that was not authorized by some council or whatever the case is. And then at that point, there was a directive. They called it the Prime Directive. Yep, just like from the movie. They called it the Prime Directive, that humans were not to be tampered with, not to have direct interactions with, things like that. And then starting in 1947, that kind of opened up a little bit. And so then there was more of a, yes, we we want to start with this new hybridization program with humans and grays. Then the government got involved in all of that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think as far as the modern, when people think about hybridization program, yes, I think it's post 1947 as far as the involvement with the U.S. government. Now, we will never know and can never know the true intentions of anyone or anything other than ourselves. So the ETs may have said, yeah, we're going to take humans and we're only going to take their DNA. We're only going to do this. We're only going to do that. And they may did a whole bunch of other things. And the government may have found out about it. Or the government may have just realized that these are much more highly intelligent and technological beings. And we really didn't think about that when we made this negotiation. We really didn't think about what could their intentions be. And so I think they kind of at some point realized that we better have our own, secret space, U.S. government driven, and we've already got some captive, ETs, and we can easily grab humans and, hey, let's use their DNA and all this kind of stuff. So
Are you saying then that this program that's led by humans is not really directly involving ETs, but they're just using ETs that have already been captured and are housed somewhere?
well, that's just the impression that I got from Gaetz' comments because he used the word forced.
Mm-hmm.
So in my mind, unless they're working with malevolent ETs or something, but I get the impression that we have enough technology at this point and we have enough captive ETs at this point and scientists and geneticists that they can do experiments. Now, whether those experiments are anywhere on the level of the ones directed by and overseen by the ETs, who knows? I mean, they could really be making some messed up beings. It doesn't seem at all moral if you don't really have the true knowledge of genetics and I don't even know. But it's not out of the realm of possibility that there are ETs helping them with that. I'm just saying this is what Gaetz said and what he was briefed on, which he hasn't seen. He hasn't seen with his eyes. He hasn't been to the facilities.
Sure, yeah, and that, that points to it. In my mind, it's possible that this briefing maybe didn't happen. Maybe he's making it up. If it did happen, maybe he's somehow intentionally being misled for whatever nefarious reason, or it very well could have happened. Either way, this is a very, interesting thing. It's like the conversation is happening regardless. It's so hard to know what the purpose of the conversation is. I would hope that if there is a hybridization program, that there is some type of positive intention. And if the intent is to improve or add another sort of link in the communication chain among galactic entities that are communicating, let's hope that that's true, because we could really go down the rabbit hole about what possible reason could there be this hybridization program. And there's, I'm sure, as you know way more about it than me, many theories about that probably. So, but yeah, it's really interesting what he said. It's just putting this conversation back into the public scope. And a lot of folks that are aligned with Matt Gaetz tend to come from that conservative conspiracy theory camp. So I could see someone arguing that this was just sort of fodder for this just conspiracy theory group to continue to back him politically. So I don't,
Well, now we have to keep in mind too that it wasn't just him that was briefed. Also, Congressman Burchett and Anna Paulina Luna were also at the same briefing. Now, I don't know if Luna has made specific comments on what Gaetz said, but Burchett did confirm that in the TMZ interview. It happened in Florida. They were turned away. And then Matt called someone at the Pentagon and they were let in and the briefing happened. Just wanted to add that for people that just didn't know that little tidbit there.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing that, and I don't know exactly when this happened. I know this was post-Trump comments, but pre-Burchett being on News Nation, was J.D. Vance also had a little something to say. He went on a podcast and said something about he's obsessed with the whole phenomenon and he talks about it with his friends and like he has all this curiosity is kind of where he was going with this. And then I want to say a few days after that, he either made a statement or somebody asked him in a little short interview or something, and he said, I think they're demons. So I wanted to add that there because we didn't originally talk about that. People can conjecture all day long about why did he say demons. Now we know, if you know JD Vance, you probably know about his religious beliefs. He's conservative. You know, it's kind of like the backbone of his life is he's got the Bible at his feet, whatever you want to call it. I want to say in his first interview, he said something to the effect of someone might think is an alien, another person might think is an angel, another person might think is a demon. So he actually did say something to that effect in the first interview. And again, I want to reiterate the comment I made about Obama's interview and this list of questions, because I feel like, again, the current vice president going on a podcast, that person probably had a list of things that could be asked and definitely could not be asked. So I think JD Vance knew this question was coming and was already prepared for it. But then he goes on a few days later and talks about how he just thinks they're demons. So it's like, are we doing this fear narrative? Like, what is this about? Why is that comment necessary? So there's so many implications of why someone might have done that, why it's in the news, the timing of everything, you know, the distribution of it throughout the media. There's so many things at play. It's just exhausting, honestly.
And to me, it almost feels like this just intentional campaign to confuse the American public. But whether or not that's true, I think it's happening regardless. I think there are, the conversations are happening, confusion is the fact that he's throwing in this implication of, well, maybe these are demons and not, otherworldly beings that are either malevolent or benevolent, regardless of whether or not God exists. It's another branch on the tree. And, I would think that if JD Vance is aware of whatever secrets the public isn't aware of, that also Trump would be, that also Obama would be, why wouldn't their narratives all line up? And it almost seems like Vance's narrative doesn't line up with what some others have said. So maybe he's just filtering that through his own religion and coming to his own conclusions versus maybe seeing things as they are or as he's been briefed. I mean, obviously today we don't know the answers to those questions, but again, it's interesting to see different strands and nuances in the narratives happening among these different public figures, both conservative and progressive with President Obama, who, spoke more generally about it. So.
And thankfully, the UAP Transparency Act, which is now for this session, it is HR 1187. If you wanted to keep up with it, when they originally introduced it in 2024, it was HR 8179, but the numbers change every year. So it's still in play. I hope that it happens. Now, here's two sort of trains of thought, and you probably know where we're going with this, but two tracks of thought on how this could unfold if disclosure happens. Okay. Is that there's going to be this fear-bent, possibly a false flag invasion scenario, Project Bluebeam, things like this. Okay. Or there could be maybe this more positive to it, like they're here to help us. They've been here a lot longer than you think. They've helped us develop this, that, and the other. Maybe here are some that you didn't even know were ETs that are we're revealing now that they're ETs. I don't know. Let's talk about Einstein, Tesla, something like that. And yes, we're so sorry on behalf of the government that we kept this from you for so long. Like that's the best case scenario. So there's I feel like people are going like best case scenario or worst case scenario and forgetting all of this gray area in between of, I don't think it's going to be either one of those. I think and really everyone's perspective is different. My best case scenario might be somebody else's worst case scenario because like Vance said, their whole religious world or whatever is going to be blown up. And that's a subset of people that maybe can't take this, that aren't ready for. I think that dadgummit, these people that are in power really underestimate what the American people can handle and can't handle. So I think, they treat us like we're little kids. It drives me nuts. And then we don't know what's going to be happening for May, but we know in June, like you talked about Steven Spielberg, this movie Disclosure Day that is coming out. Now, I watched an interview with Spielberg, and he talked recently about they had to sign these like super duper, thorough NDAs that everybody, because it filmed over a period of, I want to say 2 years, and nobody talked about it. There's a reason for all of that. Like, I don't think the timing is just a coincidence. And if you think about all Steven Spielberg have done, he was involved in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the E.T. movie. So he's done things like this already. So it's coming out on June the 12th. And I want to say that's the nationwide release date. Like, everyone's getting it at the same time. I don't think they're doing premieres ahead of time. I'll double check that before I say for sure. But I think, I'm just going to look that up right now, because I think that's a significant thing about it, is that they're not releasing it to anybody early. It's going to basically have the ability and opportunity for everybody to see it on the same day for the first time.
I'm sure there are other films who have sort of had this intentional mystique around the topic of the film, so that, people are clamoring to the theaters the first week that it's out for big box office sales. And I'll say, when I was doing a little bit of research on this, there's a couple different strands of thought on this and why this is happening. Of course, you've got some in the camp of that, this film is inspired by actual entities in communication with Spielberg and kind of helping him to narrate the story in a way and play it out to where it's realistic. There's another camp of people that say this is just a continuation in a line of theme of films that Spielberg has been playing with since his early career. Like you say, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You've got E.T. You also have War of the Worlds, which he directed, which was not a pleasant film. So this could just be another chapter, or maybe he somehow got some information from entities that is helping him with this film. And I think you have some comments on that, Allison, and what you've read about that. So I'm curious what your knowledge is of that. And, if you believe that there has been entities sort of working behind the scenes with him to develop this film.
So while you were talking, and yes, I'll answer that, but while you were talking, I did look to see if there were any early releases scheduled, and there are not. Like, June 12th is the day, at least none that have been announced so far. So I think that's kind of telling in and of itself. Now, we've talked about Bashar, the entity channeled by Daryl Anka, many times on our podcast. We have both followed him for probably 2 decades at this point, maybe not quite that long, but a long time. Seen him at a lot of events and listened to his transmissions and all that good stuff. And for the most part, a lot of what he says resonates. There have been other people as well that have made a comment on certain things that are in the pop culture, say Star Wars movies, Star Trek movies, things like that, where there have been ET channelers and other channelers that have hinted at or come right out and said that there was inspiration, at least, if not direct influence. Right. Thank you. My words are not wording today. Direct influence with the creators of those types of shows. And so recently, in the March 2026 monthly transmission that Bashar did, I watched it live, and someone asked him, were there any ET influences on it? Because people that are familiar with Bashar know that he has said that in other movies and things like that, that there has been influence. So this person wanted to know, well, what about Disclosure Day? Has there been influence, And he confirmed, yes, there has been some influence. Hybrids is what he talked about. And that he will comment more on the movie after it's been released. So thought that was kind of interesting. It's on their radar. Now, is Steven Spielberg in his basement with an alien writing the script? Or does Spielberg even know of this influence? Does he not? I feel like maybe he does. So yeah, I'll try to find that exact quote from Bashar and put that out there. I don't know if there's going to be, if it's just a movie, if there's going to be something else to it at the end. How like there's like Easter eggs left at the end of the movies, but is this Easter egg going to be related to like something real?
Mm-hmm.
Like that, it just blows my mind to think about it. But
Yeah.
it's probably just gonna be a super awesome movie. I'm gonna be there for the first showing. I'm gonna get like a really early ticket, and hopefully I can get a group of people to go and we can all watch it. But I'm really excited about it. And then what happens beyond that for the rest of 2026? From what I understand, we're supposed to have full disclosure by the end of the year. So, I mean, we've already had so much happen recently. It'll be interesting to follow this timeline. Now, one thing that we touched on a little bit earlier that we haven't really talked about much, and I don't want to belabor this at all, but it has been something that's been in the news recently. And when I did my research on this a few days ago, there had only been 9 people, and now there's a 10th person that they have attempted to identify and link to this pattern of people that are tied to either military or aerospace programs that have either mysteriously disappeared or been murdered. So whenever Congressman Burchett had went on his News Nation interview, that's what they started their interview out with is, hey, this has been in the news a lot. What do you think about this? And of course, he seemed very concerned. And then they kind of segued into the Matt Gaetz comments. But one of the things Burchett talked about as well is one, it was clear that he takes it really seriously. He sees it as a legitimate pattern and link that there is an intentional silencing of this people. Now, whether that is a true silencing or some people say that they've gone into witness protection, the ones that are missing, very mysterious disappearances. But he made a comment on this particular interview because, like I said, he has been very vocal in the public about this. He said, I'm not suicidal and I don't take risks. Because he's taking it that serious that if, hey, he shows up dead or gone or no one can find him or whatever, that it wasn't by his own accord.
Yeah, I think it's disturbing either way, whether or not there's a pattern that connects all of these mysterious disappearance or deaths to some sort of secret UAP program or hybridization program or whatever it may be, or that, again, we still have like top level, super smart people being disappeared or being murdered. The other implications for that are just as alarming, right? So maybe they're working on some technology that some other nation or even our own nation is trying to suppress for some reason, until the time is right or until higher profit margins can be made. Either way, it is really disturbing. And again, when you have a legitimate authority figure like Congressman Burchett voicing his concerns and claiming that there's this pattern, it's something that I could see why conspiracy theorists or even everyday people might look at that and say, gosh, what the heck is going on here? We need to keep talking about this and get to the bottom of this.
I want to just list the people really quickly if you want to go and research it yourself. So I'm going to give you their names, the date of the event, and what ties they may have had to this topic that we're talking about. So I'll try to go quickly. June 11th, 2022, Amy Eskridge, deceased. She was an Alabama researcher who claimed to work on gravity modification and anti-gravity propulsion. She died by a supposed self-inflicted gunshot wound in 2022. Had previously been pretty vocal about expressing fears for her life and had said multiple times that she would not take her life. July 30th, 2023, Michael David Hicks, deceased. He was a JPL physicist researching asteroids and comets. May 12th, 2024, Matthew James Sullivan, deceased. He was an Air Force intelligence officer and a potential UFO whistleblower, found dead from an accidental overdose just before he was set to testify to Congress about secret UFO space programs. July 4th, 2024, Frank Maywald, apologies if I'm mispronouncing that, deceased, NASA JPL researcher specializing in microwave radiometry and planetary defense. He died with no public cause of death published. May 4th, 2025, Anthony Chavez, missing. He was a former Los Alamos National Laboratory employee. Another from the same company in June 22nd, 2025, so just a month later, Monica Reza, also missing, NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. That's when I say JPL, it's the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. She was an aerospace engineer and materials processing director who disappeared during a hike in the Angeles National Forest. She worked on advanced propulsion materials under Major General William Neal McCaslin, who we'll talk about here in a minute. He's also on this list. Then a few days after that, June 26, 2025, Melissa Casillas, also missing, Los Alamos National Laboratory administrative assistant, disappeared from her residence. Her mobile devices had been wiped. Then in August 2025, Stephen Garcia, also missing. He was a government contractor with nuclear clearance, disappeared mysteriously. December 2025, Jason Thomas, deceased, was a chemical biologist at Novartis who went missing and was found then, I think a few months later, deceased in a lake in Massachusetts. December 15th, 2025, again, apologies if I mispronounce this, Nuno Luriero, the head of MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center, was fatally attacked in his home in Massachusetts. February 16th, 2026, Carl Grillmeyer, deceased. He was a Caltech astrophysicist, shot and killed on at his home. His research included data analysis tools that overlap with military tracking systems. And the most recent and probably the most well-known, we talked about McCaslin a minute ago, but on February 27th, 2026, William Neal McCaslin, missing. He is a retired Air Force Major General and a former commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. He vanished from his Albuquerque home this year. He was reportedly also a UFO disclosure advisor. He left his glasses and his phone behind.
Wow. When you read all those details, it's quite alarming. And even the most skeptical among us could hear that list and the timing. Yeah, that's really concerning. Again, as someone who considers himself generally a skeptic, that's very concerning. I'm curious. I don't want to do too much speculating here, but I'm curious your thoughts on if there is a pattern here and if people are being silenced, or I guess in the scenario, if some are being kept in, like you said, witness protection. You know, I just have so many questions. Is this our U.S. government? Is this another government? Is this some rogue entity? Is this the CIA? Is this the shadow? You know, what would the purpose be for this? Especially as it seems as though the United States is moving us towards normalizing these conversations so that we can have open disclosure. Gosh, like who doesn't want that to happen? So it seems like we've got these two opposing forces happening right here and playing out on U.S. soil. I'm just wondering right now as I'm speaking if we've seen any other scientists go missing or be killed that are maybe not housed or researching in the U.S. And I know we can't answer that question right now, but that would add some additional sort of intrigue to this whole situation. But rest in peace to all these people. It's awful. You know, you spend your
And the
whole
ones that are missing, hopefully they're
Right.
found
Yes,
safely.
hopefully. Absolutely. So, wow, interesting.
There's, again, like with all of this, there's more questions than there are answers. And then when we do start getting answers, we then have to question that because we don't know. Is it witness protection? And those people are going to be needed to disseminate the actual positive information whenever false flag invasion happens. Or it could be blah, blah, blah. Like fill in the blank of every possible scenario and why these people, you know, something may have happened to them. Yeah, it's just, again, just too many questions, things to think about.
Well, I will say, I think it is safe to say, though, considering that if and when full disclosure happens, there are going to be multiple public narratives running. Because let's say in this scenario that our U.S. government, or just say a coordinated global government, wants to disclose everything that has been collected over the years and give us all the correct information, whoever's silencing these scientists, if that is a pattern and if there is an active effort happening, they're going to be putting out a narrative as well. So I think we can safely say there are going to be multiple narratives happening. You know, and now I'm thinking about also Disclosure Day and Spielberg's film and how historically we can see Hollywood directors being sort of nudged and in some cases I wouldn't say forced, but somewhere between nudged and forced from our own U.S. government to put out propagandist types films or to, normalize whatever conversation the U.S. government wants to echo out into the American people. When I watched the trailer to the film, it has this hint of ominous tone, and maybe that's just to create this mystique or to feed into what maybe the dominant view is on this topic. So I'm curious to see how that's going to play out. Are these entities depicted in the film going to be malevolent or benevolent? Will we see a mix? In my mind, I'm just hearing this sort of ominous music, and so that makes me think that potentially we're going to see, a film that's going to cover this topic, and it's not going to be benevolent beings. So what then does that mean if this is something that has been planned or pushed by other forces beyond just Steven Spielberg and his own imagination? I mean, again, like you said, there are just so many questions.
It's been a few weeks since I watched the trailer, but from what I remember on, I guess, the latest version, because I think there's a few versions of the trailer out, is that there's this sort of like wonderment to it as well, because you see the scene with the girl with this deer in her bedroom, things like that. And then you also have this one where these look like a government official police force are barging into this person's hotel room, the person who's supposedly going to be providing disclosure to everyone all at once. And so I don't know. There's a lot of takeaways from the content of the film, and obviously, and Spielberg has said there's something at the end, like you're not going to see the ending coming. That is what he has said in interviews. Everyone's gone to the theater after seeing a preview and going, well, that scene wasn't even in the movie, or I wasn't expecting that.
Right.
Doesn't that drive you crazy? Where I'm going with this is the one thing that I do remember from the trailer was the protagonist, the main guy, who is the one seemingly responsible for and has the information of this disclosure and the capability, is like wanting to do it to everyone all at once. How would that even possibly be accomplished? Because not everyone's watching the news at the same time. Okay. But Bashar, going back to him, I just want to say this really quickly, is that he has talked about that one way it could unfold, and this was like a few years ago, I mean, a long time ago, that he said in a transmission, and it just has always stuck with me, is that one way that it could play out and has played out in other civilizations that have had open contact is that there can be this thing where everyone, almost like a psychically driven or spiritually driven disclosure, where it's like everyone has the same dream all of a sudden at the same time, or same vision, or their kundalini awakening, or Mother Mary is in front of you, or whatever. You like these types of things have happened in movies where people have had these mass visions together. And so that part in that trailer made me think of what Bashar has said before, that's like a possibility. And I'm like, man, that would be cool. Like, just think that would be so awesome.
It would be cool, but I say but because as you're talking about that, my skeptic brain is saying, well, we know that technology has already been developed for essentially mind control. So if the world governments have refined this technology that can be broadcast maybe through our cell phones. The vast majority of people on the planet have a cell phone. Even if you're in a very deprived situation, you probably have a cell phone.
But it would be like kids too. Like, it would be like everybody. It would just almost be like this download into everybody's mind of this information that we don't already have. And then everyone has the same experience. So everyone's conversations are going to be all about this. It's crazy. Yeah, but there's definitely...
It's just, oh gosh, I feel like I'm sitting on pins and needles constantly, because in my mind, there are just these opposing voices and forces happening where we have hopefully what will be benevolent beings that are external to humans that want to contact us in order, hopefully, for a positive purpose. Yet I can't imagine how all of the capitalists across our planet, who are only pretty much interested in resource extraction and making money and controlling our world, like how they're not gonna be upset about that. So if the ruling class has information that they haven't released to the public, my brain is just doing mental gymnastics trying to somehow predict or figure out how this will all play out, and that how we are able to discern what's going to come.
One of the books that I have recommended before that I will recommend over and over again, and I actually need to reread, is AD, After Disclosure, by Richard Dolan and Bryce Zabel. It was published in 2012, but it's specifically about the world after disclosure, the day after, the week after. And it goes into, what does law look like? What does the energy sector look like? What does education look like? It will really give people, I think, a lot of insights and almost preparation for, if you read it ahead of time, I think it can help people prepare. Yeah, I'll put a link to that book, and I think it's a really, really good one. I want to mention too that whether the government outright says, look, aliens exist. Yes, we have reverse engineering programs because we have retrieved crash, materials and ships, and there are ETs housed over here. And yep, we've had these space programs and we've developed this and we've done that. Whether that happens or not, another theme of the Year of Disclosure that has gone around in the ET, UFO, and channeling circles is that there's just going to be a lot more sightings and a lot more people having personal experiences or in small groups or something like that. So I get the MUFON newsletter every month, so Mutual UFO Network. At the end of the newsletter, they always put some statistics on people have reported specific sightings into their MUFON database. I want to read some of the March ones just because I think it's interesting. So, and it's a worldwide database, but for the most part, it's got a lot of US reporting. There were 342 globally into their system in March 2026. Now, their reports cover both abductions and sightings and like everything in between. So 342 encompasses all of that together. Of the 342, 262 of them were the US. As far as the ones that were specifically craft seen, 55 of them were spheres, 38 were circles, 31 were triangles, 26 were star-like, and then it kind of goes down from there. The states, California had 37 reports, Texas had 21, Florida had 16, Arizona had 12. Those are generally the biggest ones I see anyway. I usually see Ohio high on the list, and it is again at 10. Arkansas is usually somewhere in the middle, which I always find really interesting, at 5. So 5 to 6 per month in Arkansas is actually pretty typical on the MUFON database. Now, the NUFORC database doesn't have as many for Arkansas per month, but that's another one if you're interested in NUFORC.com, NUFORC, National UFO Reporting Center. All of their reports are public. You can see what the person wrote, if they had any attachments. MUFON, they only show the last 20 reports reported from all over the world. So, like, you can't filter for just Arkansas. You can't filter for a date range. A lot of times you can't always see all of the attachments. Now, MUFON collects all kinds of other things too. They have a huge questionnaire. They collect a lot of personal information. Those are both too, like, bookmark those sites. They also reported 11 landings, hoverings, or takeoffs, and 30 entities observed. Does the MUFON questionnaire or survey, do they ask about, you said they ask personal questions. Do you know if it asks things like, how do you feel during, like, let's say someone sees an entity? Is there any, I know that may take you some extra looking, but. Well, I was a MUFON investigator for a while. So yeah, I can tell you it's going to ask, and once their demographic information, an investigator sort of attempts to kind of weed out the junk because they only want to investigate reports that seem legitimate or that there may be additional evidence for or something like that. They don't want to waste their time on people that are just entering crap in there. Okay. And people can remain anonymous, so they can put fake information in there, but no one's then going to be able to follow up with you to do that investigation. But yeah, they're going to get all of your demographic information except for, they don't need your social security number and things like that. They want to know your career. I mean, they even ask you health questions. Do you wear glasses? Do you have any hearing problems? Because that's significant to know if you report you heard a sound or you perceive something to be such and such far away or whatever. Like they want to know that type of thing. They want to know if you were by yourself or there are other witnesses, time, date, trajectory, all of this kind of stuff. And then, of course, the narrative of what happened. They want you to be as detailed as possible. What happened before, what happened during, what happened after. They ask about your feelings. And they even have groups that say if people have had abductions or they want to maybe talk to somebody about it, they have a specific experiencer research team that they will refer you to who can get you to a counselor or something like that. So MUFON has a lot of great things that they provide to experiencers, and they're pretty much on the ball about their investigations. A lot of times they'll go out to the site if they think it's warranted. You know, if you just saw something far away in the sky, they're probably not going to come out and investigate that because they can do all of that investigating online. They can look at flight records. They're going to look at, was there any space launches? Was there any satellite launches? Any space debris that's coming back into the atmosphere? There are ways to do that. You know, when was sunset? What was the weather like? I mean, there's so much research that goes into debunking what something could be because they do their investigation, they talk to you, they do their all their stuff, and then they report back to you their findings. And they say, well, we believe it was a Chinese lantern. Oh, we believe it was a plane. And here's why. Here's the evidence that we have. Or they might say, it's an unknown. Here are the reasons why we think it's unknown. Here's everything that we've ruled out. So it's super thorough. NUFORC, they don't have like investigators like MUFON does, but you'll see on their website if someone, like recently in Arkansas, someone had put that they saw this light floating by the horizon and it sort of slowly drifted down. And just from their description, someone at NUFORC, I don't know if it was just the people that run the page, put probable Chinese lantern. But anyway, we got off on a tangent a little bit, but yeah, I always want to plug this. If you have had an experience and you want to talk to somebody about it and you feel like you don't have anybody to talk to and you're not comfortable putting your information on an online database, if you have a story you want to say, you want somebody to listen, hit me up. Okay. I'm not going to record your information anywhere. I'm not going to be writing it down anywhere. But I like to talk to people about that and, you know, just like let them unload and share with me. So
I don't think it was really a tangent to go off on MUFON for long because I think, like you said, you know, in the year of disclosure and as we get closer to open contact, Bashar and others have said that this means people will be, there will be more sightings. So it would stand to reason that MUFON and what's the other one called? NUFORC would be getting these increased submissions potentially. I'm curious when people are reporting what their feelings are, you know, what's the mix of, oh, I'm hopeful or I'm curious or I'm scared and what that looks like. Do you know what that looks like? So when you're on MUFON and you're giving details about your experience, and let's say one of your feelings that you felt at the time was fear, right? Or surprise, or whatever that feeling was. Do you know generally some statistics or just a general sense of what's being reported in terms of what people are feeling?
So I never ventured out of the Arkansas database really, but from some of the cases that I worked where they had, I would say, a significant enough experience, everyone had like a positive feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if people had a fearful feeling, they're less likely to report it or want to talk to somebody about it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't talk to anybody that had been abducted that had made a MUFON report, but I did talk to people who saw things in the sky fairly close up. And then I talked to some people who like they had a vision that came along with it or something like that. And maybe that was kind of freaked them out just because it was so different from what they're used to, you know?
Right.
But ultimately, like from what I recall, my experience with these people is the resounding sort of consensus was more positive, more like, yeah, curiosity, wonderment. It definitely changed their perspective on what's out there and their belief system. So I think that's what a lot of people will come to the conclusion of is everything I've been told is a lie. And what we've used the word implication so many times in this podcast, but what other implications does that have on everything else? Like life after death, astral projection, multiple dimensions. I don't know, just so many things.
Yeah, and it's really not a stretch to say there are a lot of different individuals and entities that are gatekeeping information that would just, I guess, as Tim Gaetz would say, keep you up at night, or
Tim Burchett.
Tim Burchett would say, keep you up at night. Yeah, there's just so many unknowns. So I think any disclosure that happens is great. We're getting more pieces of information. I know we'll then have to sort of discern and run them through our own filters. But hopefully all new information will be good information, sound and accurate, and that we can just as humanity come closer to some universal truths. You know, we're all in our own ways searching for meaning, purpose, something more than just we're just biological beings walking around, running the rat race, doing what humans do. And I know there are people, around the world that would just say that's all we're here for. There's nothing bigger. But I think the most of us have that sort of curiosity and wonderment and just sort of expectation that there is something more. And yeah, it seems like we're coming into more information all the time.
And, I have heard Bashar say a bunch of times that once we have disclosure and open contact, that we will be given all of our history. And so I think that's going to clear up a lot of things for people collectively. And yeah, I just think it's going to have a lot of ripple effects throughout everyone's life. Also, I want to remind people that staying positive brings in a positive future and staying negative brings in a negative future. So just keep on keeping on with your life, doing what you love, serving others, and, petting your dog and going to visit your grandma and all that. And don't let something that Trump says distract you from your day-to-day life unless it's at your front door kind of thing. And then when it gets to your front door, use discernment and hold your center and stay grounded and be curious and open-minded. I mean, that's the best advice I can give. Because, yeah, some people might be, it's kind of like you go to run a marathon and you've been bedridden for 3 months, you're going to pull your hamstring probably pretty quick. But somebody who's been preparing for this marathon for years and years, it's still going to be hard to run a marathon, but not nearly as hard as a person who's hasn't used their legs in 3 months. So I don't know. I kind of see it like that. Like, you always want to do a little bit to prepare yourself, but there's going to be people that are just, they don't have any reference. They don't watch the news. They don't take, there's no credence that they've give to this. And so they're going to be limping to the finish line. Or maybe being dragged to the finish line.
Kicking and screaming.
Maybe they'll learn something along the way.
Right.
And so they can get up and walk at least. But it's going to be a little bit more slow going for them. This is when, like, the light workers are going to have to be doing their work, And have to be, like, helping people with their fears. But you also have to hold your own discernment and not to be swayed by what somebody says or what the news says or stuff like that. You gotta make your own decisions. Go with your gut. Go with your gut. Don't let Fox News influence you.
I think to your point, in terms of sort of holding your center, whatever comes, the best way we can prepare ourselves for anything, even if nothing comes in terms of disclosure and, we're just thinking about other things that may happen in a human life, it's important that we go inside ourselves, that we get to know ourselves, that we dig deep into our own biases and our own traumas and our own perceptions. And we learn as much as we can about ourselves and who we are. And we learn to trust ourselves so that whatever comes, we have at least some anchor point to hold on to. I think that's going to be extremely important. And also, I just personally am excited to see if and how sightings increase over this year. We're being told by Bashar and others to expect that. So it'll be interesting to see how that is either reported in the media or how people in your own personal circle may begin to share some things with you, or even ask questions to see maybe where you're at. Are you open to this information? So I'd say, as you said, Allison, keep your mind open, but also keep your ears open, be inquisitive, do that self-work to center yourself and get yourself prepared and find your anchor. Hang on for the ride, because either way, it's
Woo!
going to be a ride.
Yeehaw.
And yeah, we shall see. Do you have any last impressions you want to leave with the audience? Last questions, last points?
I don't really have any impressions or questions. I just want to say that here in a few weeks, I'm going to be volunteering at a channel panel event in California with a whole bunch of ET channelers, and the theme of it is embracing contact. They have a theme every time. So I'm sure there will be a lot of discussions about disclosure and open contact. Perhaps we can touch on that a little bit in the next episode when I get back. So as the White House said, stay tuned.
You're quoting the White House now?
Yep. Hey, they don't coin that phrase, okay?
They don't. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see to hear you report back on those conversations at that channel panel. Really cool. Gosh, I just feel like I have so many questions still swirling around in my brain, but interesting conversation. There is one more thing I want to add from the research that I did. You know, we've acknowledged that we have this convergence of different information all pointing towards, you know, the existence of extraterrestrial life. We've got, as you laid out in the timeline, right, all the things that have happened just in the last decade, and now all the things that have happened so far in this year. I will say, despite this sort of increase in conversation and sort of shift in normalization, we still have yet to see some really hard evidence, right? So until we have full disclosure,
I would
We're just-
disagree with that. Do
well,
you remember in the congressional hearing, the last one they showed with that, I think it was remember the radar.
Mhm.
I don't remember from what, if that was from a ship or if that was from a plane, of that object that was hit by some type of missile, and it broke apart and it didn't even touch this object. Like, I'm just saying, that's pretty hard evidence.
Well, it's evidence that there's something that is unexplained. So some
Yeah,
folks
an
would say,
unknown.
sure, right. So there's definitely that acknowledgement. I mean, the government has acknowledged UAPs, right? They haven't obviously come out and said it's X, Y, or Z. There's just this acknowledgement of the unknown, and that's really what's most interesting, that hopefully we'll have some missing pieces in later this year. So, yay.
Yep. The puzzle is coming together.
Yes, it is.
Love it.
Well, we are signing off.
Signing off.
Signing off. Goodbye now.